In a lot of different ways, indie games fill those voids that modern big shots leave holes for. Games will grow and evolve, and a lot of the time they simply divert from what a lot of the original fans loved so much. No longer held back by limitations of the time, developers will often move on to bigger and quote-unquote better things. Your opinions may differ on this. Maybe you're a big fan of how different something like Breath of the Wild is compared to Ocarina of Time. Or maybe you prefer the classic games in the Sonic series compared to the open zones in Sonic Frontiers. Or maybe you don't care at all as long as the game is good. I find that my opinion jumps around from series to series, but I still miss some of those ideas and mechanics from older games, even if I still really like where the series is headed with newer titles. Now, where this leaves a good chunk of indie games is with a lot of those games filling voids just by being inspired by those older games. If you missed the 8-bit era of platforming, games like Shovel Knight have got you covered. Have you been craving a good Metroidvania? Try Bloodstained Ritual of the Night. But one style I see a lot of is that retro horror style. A lot of these strive to capture something from the older Resident Evil and Silent Hill games, but there's one in particular that really got my attention. I won't even sugarcoat it. Crow Country is one of my favorite indie games ever made. To be completely fair, it is almost exactly what I look for in horror titles. While Crow Country isn't the scariest game ever made, it really isn't that kind of horror game. Sure, there may have been a moment or two where the game got me to jump or feel uneasy, but it isn't made to have you cowering in fear at every corner. At least it doesn't act like that's the goal. What makes Crow Country such a good horror game is its atmosphere and narrative. Some may not like that it isn't an in-your-face thrill ride of fear that puts tears in your eyes, but I like this kind of horror. Crow Country focuses more on letting the environment and player action set the feeling. It's that combination of going through someplace unfamiliar with a more limited set of controls that builds that tension. The jump scares in Crow Country are pretty tame. It's usually just an enemy coming out of its hiding place, rather than a scary face filling the screen with a loud sound effect. And while the sudden appearance of a foe obviously isn't that scary, especially with a more simplistic art style, it's a sudden need to react to a new threat that you may have not been ready for, and the controls do wonders for this. I understand the complaint that many have when playing older Resident Evil titles. The controls are frustrating, but you really learn to grasp these controls, and in turn you get better at the game. These stiff or clunky controls aren't bad game design. Rather, they're in place to keep the player on their toes. You need to do more to attack an enemy, rather than locking on and pressing fire. So when we look back at Crow Country, it feels like a really good evolution to that original idea. You need to stop and react to the threats. You can't just strafe around the enemy and unload an entire arsenal upon them. Each encounter is a puzzle within itself. The solution is obvious: run away or take the enemy down. But it still comes down to the fact that you need to react, and that's what builds the fear. However, and this will be a good or bad thing depending on how you look at it, Crow Country has two different play styles. A more modern gameplay style with the control sticks, and tank controls on the directional buttons. It's fairly easy to tell the game was initially designed with just the tank controls in mind, but those modern controls can make it very easy to react to enemies, or at least it makes it easy to adapt to the controls so it feels like it's easier to react. The core movement and combat controls are still a bit more limiting. This is a good thing, but having modern controls does feel like it makes the game easier. That's the bad part of this. The good part is just how great the game feels after you get the hang of the modern controls. I'm a fan of both modern and tank controls, but couple the modern controls in with how the camera works, oh boy, this game can feel really nice to master. On that note of the camera, the major difference in Crow Country and its PS1 inspirations is in its perspective. Resident Evil has its fixed perspectives, and Silent Hill has the more dynamic fixed camera. Both of these styles of camera restrict what the player can see, another reason why things can feel uneasy or more frightening. Crow Country's camera achieves the same goal, but in a totally different way. The camera is set at an angle, but you can still spin it around. It's set in a way to make it look like you're looking down into a diorama, but this angle still limits what you can see. There again, working with the need for the player to react to things, but still giving more freedom than those PS1 games. It's a really nice balance of things being inspired by the classics and working in a modern setting. The camera can both be a blessing and curse at times. With all the standard enemies, the camera works really well, letting you swing it around so you can have a comfortable view of what you're aiming at. However, in addition to enemies, there are also traps. These traps can blend in with the environment quite well. That on its own is fine, but with the camera, especially with the angle it's at, a smaller trap can be really well hidden. Maybe a little too well. These traps aren't things that'll end your game in an instant, but they can do some damage. They can even cause poison, which comes off as a total surprise. There aren't many things that can even poison the player, so when these traps pop up out of nowhere, they get a bit annoying. One last element of what makes those classic horror games so frightening is the survival aspect. In Resident Evil, you're constantly on the lookout for more health pickups and ammo. There's a lot of moments where it feels like you're battling with your own inventory just as much as you're battling with the monsters. It puts this tension on every shot. You need to make every bullet count. You cannot mess this up or it's back to the last save. Crow Country also has these elements, ammo pickups, healing kits, and other tools, but Crow Country can feel a little easy because of how generous it is with its items. Ammo for the standard pistol is very abundant. You can get it from various vending machines, trash cans, or other places. Not to mention in the starting area of the game, there's a car you can visit to get some ammo if you're running out of pistol ammo. This all sounds like a bad thing at first, but there are a couple really good things about this difficulty. Firstly, and most obvious, there is a hard mode. This amps up everything from the normal mode. It limits the ammo drops, enemies are more aggressive, and the hint system is completely out of service. This is what you want to play if you're looking for a challenge, but in all honesty, I recommend playing the original difficulty first. This difficulty is perfect for newcomers to the genre. Survival horror can be really tough to get into, especially the more classic styled ones. This mode is slower paced and allows for plenty of time for the player to learn the controls in addition to the game's mechanics. And if you're really just in it for the narrative, there's a mode for that too, allowing for you to just go solve puzzles and read up on the story. Speaking of that story, that is a huge reason as to why I like Crow Country. Like most horror games, the main goal is really just to understand what the heck is going on, and I find that journey really fun. Seeing all the twists unfold, coming to understand what's up with the monsters, and of course finding out what happened to Mr. Crow all just adds up to why I enjoy this game so much. Admittedly, there are a couple twists that are really obvious, but there's still some that got me wanting to look deeper. The story revolved around Crow Country, a theme park. After the park's sudden closure in 1988, its owner, Edward Crow, suddenly disappeared. 2 years later, and still no sign of Mr. Crow. Despite that long period of time, someone is sent to look into the missing persons case. That someone being our protagonist, Mara Forrest, a cop and firearms expert. While you wouldn't get this role from her appearance, she looks like a chubby little kid who dyed her hair in rebellion. But she does have the ID for it, and her trunk is where the player can go endlessly restock their ammo. Mara's very prepared for things to not go well here, and she doesn't seem too surprised at all to find monsters lurking about. There's no point where Mara questions whether or not to open fire on anything that isn't human. But in all fairness, these monsters, also known as guests, certainly don't look or act peaceful. They aren't the type of creatures to question if they're human, or if they are, if they're alive. They stumble and groan like a typical zombie, but they scream out when dying and have this weird, almost melting look to them. Overall, Mara is a pretty good protagonist. She's a bit sassy when responding to people, but she's rather funny in her outlook towards things. Again, she doesn't seem too scared of what's going on around her. Rather, she's really focused on accomplishing her goal. She acts super mysterious about this, but if you play the game, it's super obvious what her intentions are fueled by. The other characters sprinkled throughout the game are all pretty interesting as well. They're pretty unique, and it's easy to get attached to them just with a couple of interactions. Arthur Mole, Natalie Crow, Douglas Pike, and Julie Barron are the weaker of the cast, as they usually are just there to push the story in the right direction. Arthur sets up a couple of interactions with the guests, and really helps to understand the mystery around the park itself. Natalie is Edward's daughter, and she provides a bit more insight on Edward as a person, and gives us a look back at his history. Douglas Pike was the one in charge of the park, but we only really read about him. Lastly, Julie is there to help push Mara's story beyond Mara having internal thoughts. Marvin Trumbull is a slime bag who comes off as such immediately. He's the typical shady character that you can just tell is a piece of trash just by hearing him speak. He had a hand at the work that's been going on behind the scenes here at Crow Country, so you'll see his name pop up in a lot of the text. Tolman is an engineer and another person in cahoots with Edward Crow. Tolman is very different from Marvin, however. He comes off as very stern, but he has his moments of showing that he cares. Lastly, there's Harrison James, another officer sent to investigate the disappearance of Edward Crow. But he's late to the scene thanks to someone slashing his car tires, which forces him to borrow his sister's bike, so he's seen wandering about with a pink bike. Harrison doesn't show up too much throughout Crow Country, but he's a pretty cool character. He's got the typical survival horror protagonist cut, his hair parted in the front like Leon S. Kennedy or James Sunderland. It's like Harrison was the destined protagonist, but someone made him late to the party, stripping him of his survival horror destiny. One of the things that sells Harrison as a character is the theme that plays while you speak with him. It's calming, but almost a little playful. Very fitting for the very normal-looking cop walking around the abandoned theme park with a pink bicycle. The music in general is a pretty big highlight for Crow Country. The soundtrack was done by Aykroyd, someone who I've been following for quite some time on social media, yet somehow I completely missed that he had done work for Crow Country, until I got to the game's credits. Each track in the game helps build the atmosphere and set the tone. The music found in save rooms is very similar to the themes that can be heard in Resident Evil save rooms. It's eerie but feels safe. It's executed very well and accomplishes the same things in those rooms from Resident Evil. There aren't just songs for the in-between moments either. There are different songs for different events, locations, and even encounters. The song playing in the background right now is called Bloody Escapade. It's a really good piece that makes things feel uneasy. It is a tell that something isn't right, and it's not right in the worst way possible. It's not the kind of song you would listen to on a walk or while working, but it's the kind of song that sits in your mind, elevating the tension and driving the emotion as you explore Crow Country. The music for Crow Country isn't exactly what I would call retro, but it's got that feeling that would fit the look. Obviously, the general aesthetic is trying to replicate the PS1. It's got that pixelated look, the character models in particular resemble Final Fantasy VII characters, and as I've mentioned too many times by now, there's a ton of Resident Evil and Silent Hill influence at play. Is that all there is to the visuals? Just an attempt at trying to pull at some nostalgia chords? No. This is an art style, and the developers used it to invoke emotion perfectly. With the more simplistic and retro look to the game, there's some interpretation that needs to be done, and that does a lot more than you'd think. Modern horror games both have the benefit of being able to look so nice and real, as well as the drawback that they still need to have a level of realism. Take the Silent Hill 2 remake as an example. People immediately were making fun of the face James makes in the trailer. They toned down the facial expressions he made for the full release. Honestly, it's more fitting for the character. But there is this struggle because James looks so real, so if something looks off, it's more funny than anything. Now with Crow Country, the characters don't look real, they look almost like toys. But if anything, I think that works almost better in some ways. Things need to be interpreted and won't be as obvious to understand. That abstraction gets you to think and to question. The look of the game gets you to use your own thoughts against you. It's a brilliant little trick that's only amplified by the quality of the writing. The world design of Crow Country is brilliant in the same manner. With the whole game taking place within a theme park, there are a lot of different areas to see and explore. So despite the game being a horror title, there's actually a lot of color to be seen. Of course, the tone is still set correctly with poorly lit halls, fog-filled rooms, and so forth. There's just so much variety that it makes almost every room feel memorable to some extent. So if you need to get back to a specific room, it's usually really easy to at least remember in which general area the room is located. And the game makes it really easy to navigate throughout the map as well. A lot of those multi-use keys will open up several passages that link back in other areas you've already been in, as well as open up wholly new areas. It becomes really easy to zip around the map when you need to. There are very few dead ends in the map, and most of those are rather obvious spots on the edges of the map. So if you need to get from one spot all the way on the other side of the map, it's not hard to run all the way there, assuming you've dealt with most of the enemies, of course. Those guests are a wild bunch of foes. They're a very interesting take on the standard zombie. They aren't quite zombies, but I don't want to spoil what they are here. All of them are, for the most part, humanoid, but they look twisted and deformed, with a good chunk of them looking like they're melting. These guys are melting. There's quite a large variety of guests. Even the standard guests come in a large variety of appearances. The designs and appearances of the different guests is another thing that's amplified by the art style. With a simple-looking world and easy-to-read character designs, these jumbled messes of flesh end up feeling more disturbing. They're hard to comprehend, and again, that illusion would be less impactful if the art style was different. I have my favorites of the guests. The super tall and thin guys are absolutely terrifying, and the more blobby enemies are really quite terrifying to think on a deeper level about, and I love that. There are also some boss fights, and while they aren't super challenging, their sudden appearance can catch you off guard, especially with how freaky their designs are. The challenge of these bosses is that combination of reacting and dealing with the room they're in. Some of these rooms get really small, so it's super hard to avoid attacks as well as line yourself up for the next shot. This same outlook can apply to standard enemies as well, but in a lot of cases there are things that can help you out with those guys. There are explosive barrels and electrical panels that can be shot to take out a large group of enemies, or even a single enemy with less ammunition. There are a couple ways to deal with threats. I mentioned the traps before, but obviously you have your own weapons that you can use as well. There are 4 main weapons you'll come across in the park. The handgun you start with, but there's also a shotgun, a flamethrower, and a revolver. The weapons all function how you think they would. A single more accurate shot, a widespread shot, fire, and a powerful single shot. There are also grenades that can help clear out clusters of enemies. Upgrades can be found throughout the game for the different weapons, all locked behind side puzzles the game labels as secrets. These secret puzzles are often more challenging ones, which makes sense. They're optional bits that reward the player with some upgrades. Puzzles throughout the game are all pretty fun to solve. They're the standard survival horror type of puzzles, where you typically read a note that'll push you in the right direction for the answer. But there's a really good variety of puzzles at play. You can thank most of the variety on the fact that this isn't a theme park. There are puzzles revolving around an arcade, a cafeteria, some forest fairy. Oh, and there's a piano puzzle. Very classic there. For the most part, these puzzles felt justified in how they rewarded the player. A lot of the main ones give the player access to new areas, but the secret ones usually give upgrades of some sort. Either that or revolver ammo. I know I'm sort of spoiling some of the rewards, but it's nice to know, especially when some of the more tedious puzzles reward you with something that you won't end up using until the final boss. Completing a tedious puzzle only to be rewarded with revolver ammo kind of blows. It makes sense because it's a really strong weapon, but some other upgrades are really nice to have, especially the one in the starting area of the game. Not spoiling what it is, but it's by far my favorite. The difficulty balancing for the puzzles is pretty good too. There were only a couple times I got stumped on a puzzle, the first being the octopus puzzle. I won't spoil it for those who want to figure it out on their own, but this one I had genuinely no clue how to figure out. The other being the puzzle to get into the maze room. I wouldn't even really call this a puzzle, but I just had no idea what to do with the mask item, and it didn't help how tucked away the doorway was. At this point I'm going fully into the story's deeper elements. Feel free to skip ahead to the time on screen if you would like to avoid the spoilers. As the story develops, we learn little truths behind the park and why most of the characters are there. Natalie is here for her father. It's sort of the same thing with Pullman. Marvin is essentially hiding here, and also hiding the truth. Pike was in charge of the park itself, but ultimately was driven to taking his own life because of his actions. Arthur is here because of the rumors around the guests, but Harrison is here on the missing persons case. So is Mara. Harrison doesn't seem to know Mara, so what's going on here? Well, Mara knows Julie, and while Julie is here to do some lawyer things against Edward, she's also sort of working with Mara. The case Julie is working on involves a 15-year-old girl who was injured at the park right before its closure. This girl, Elaine Marshall, was hospitalized after an attack from the first ever guest. What is Mara's relation to this? I'll get to that in a moment. But whatever it is, Mara's determined to find Edward Crow, possibly more so than anyone else here. Very quickly into the game, phones around the park start ringing. The player can answer them and Mara will chat with the stranger. This caller is Edward himself, but he knows who Mara is, further building this strange aura around Mara. So Edward is here, but where? Well, as the player explores Crow Country, there's a lot of references to a mining operation. As it turns out, they're digging up something below the park. Crow Country is essentially a cover-up. Edward discovers these roots, or rather his father did. They're metal tubes with gold inside, so in order to dig up more of these roots, he has the whole park set up to cover up what's actually going on in the location. As Edward and his crew are taking the roots apart, the first guest appears through a portal being created by the roots. This guest was still deformed, but was actually able to communicate, and what Edward and co were able to gather is that the guests are actually time travelers, coming back in time to warn of an awful event in the future. Despite this, the crew continues to take apart the roots and harvest the gold. These roots are essentially the antenna for the portal, so the further they take apart the roots, the more messed up the teleporter becomes, and the more deformed and ruined the time travelers are as they pass through. Despite all of this, Edward doesn't stop. In the end, you'll come face to face with Edward in the depths below Crow Country, at the portal the guests are coming through. Before that, as you get closer and closer to those depths in the mines, strange things will happen on the surface. Occasional gunshots will go off, as if somebody's shooting at Mara. These bullets never connect, but it's strange nonetheless. You keep going and you'll eventually find the corpse of Harrison. Not mutilated by the guests, but shot. Turns out this was the doing of Marvin. The weasel obviously was trying to cover his own tracks and ended up killing Harrison. He was trying to kill Mara as well, but he ironically meets his Disney villain demise as he's knocked off of a walkway by Julie. An accident on her, but it ends up saving both Mara and Tolman in the long run. If you haven't guessed it by now, the end of the game basically spills Mara's truth out. Her ID was actually Harrison's, just with some modifications. So she was the one who slashed his tires and delayed his arrival. Then who is Mara? Well, duh, she's Elaine. This explains why she looks so young, and why she isn't surprised by the existence of the guests. But why did she come here? Turns out, all she wanted to do was tell Crow that she's dying. Thanks to him, essentially. The attack from the guest carried some sort of virus from the portal that was too foreign to understand, so it'll kill her. Mara, or Elaine, just wanted to tell Edward to his face. Luckily, the greedy bastard made enough of an antidote to heal everyone, minus himself. He's content dying here, but he's seemingly not going to stop until he's dead. But this jerkass still has one last thing he wants to do. He's going to go through the portal and see what's on the other side. He does so and comes back as the final boss. The guests presumably only go through the portal once, so when Crow comes back, he comes back as this Sonic 3D Blast Robotnik looking freak. So how's the fight? It's pretty easy to dodge his attacks. The biggest concern with the fight is just adapting to the boss arena, which honestly is really neat looking. Thematically, it's great to end everything where the story essentially starts, but it's a totally different set piece that we haven't seen throughout the game. The bright green pool in the rocky background sets up a unique stage for the final moments. When the fight is all said and done, Crow has some last words. Lucky this guy, he goes through twice and can still speak, yet the guests go through once and their brains turn to goo. Crow offers to tell Elaine the truth of what he saw, to tell us why the time travelers had gone to such lengths to warn us. Elaine chooses not to hear him out and finishes Crow. So here are my direct thoughts on the story before we jump out of spoiler territory. The story is hinted at all throughout the game, but the time traveler stuff was definitely done the best. There is a number that you can see written on some of the floors and walls throughout the game, that being 2106. But none of the puzzles are solved with a 0, so what did that mean? As soon as you get to Tolman and the videos are all disasters, it became much more clear as to what was going on. That's the year. Then you piece together what the roots are. We just never find out what the disaster is. At first glance, and even after beating the game, I just assumed it was the disease that infected Elaine, the one Crow made the antidote for. But that seems to be more of a byproduct of the teleporter getting chopped up and ruined. So just like the guests are getting all messed up, so is some natural disease or bacteria that's coming through. So the answer must be hidden throughout the game. My guess is it has something to do with corporate greed. Crow's whole thing is that he wouldn't stop taking the gold. He ruined the chance the time travelers had, therefore ruining the future. So maybe the future is something caused by greed? Possibly a war for riches or some sort of climate change thing? There is a globe that catches fire in the manor, so my general theory after playing the game and having sat for almost a year with the plot in my head is that essentially the world is falling apart due to someone's greed. So a group of people are attempting to go back in time to stop something, or at least set the world on the right track. At first I didn't understand why Elaine didn't want to hear what the future held, but then I realized it's likely she didn't want to know because now that the portal's ruined, there's no way to ever find out how to fix it. Why live life knowing of what will come if you can't do anything about it? It's grim, but sometimes not knowing is unfortunately the best option. After beating the game, you get a grade based on a number of different things. Number of saves and heals seem to be the big ones. Nothing insane, but I like having these sort of things. It's a nice incentive to go back and better my time. My first playthrough took about 5 hours, but my second was much closer to 2. On a second playthrough, you're not reading all the text, you know where to go, and you might even remember the solutions to the puzzles. It's one of the best parts of the genre. It's a great incentive to keep playing it. To be honest, Crow Country caught me by surprise. It looked cool enough that I wanted to check it out. I'm glad I did. It ended up being one of those games I just couldn't put down. The way the story went, as well as the way the monsters were designed, from both a lore and visual aspect, they are right up my alley. I'm also a huge fan of the games that inspire Crow Country. It's all a lot of pieces that come together to make a game that I honestly feel is directly targeted at what I like. But the best parts come from the bits I never would have thought of. Plot elements, monster designs, the setting. The only bits I probably would have wanted a little different are possible different endings. Not too many, because I do prefer when a game makes it clear that one of the endings is more canon than the others, and possibly adding in some more rewards or secrets. Something like more costumes would be nice. What we got was good, but some more variety wouldn't have hurt. I also wouldn't have minded some sort of bestiary, even if it was some sort of post-game unlock. There's a section where we get some info on the individual guests, but a way to look at the enemy models and learn more about what they are, maybe from a development aspect, would have been greatly appreciated. I don't expect Crow Country to ever get a direct sequel. Mara's story seems to be wrapped up here, and it was a great time to experience. That being said, this format was brilliant. The controls were amazing, the world building was great, and the writing for the story, while predictable at times, was solid throughout the entire experience. I would love to see another game by SFB Games that tackles this format again. Spice things up, do something wacky, I don't care. I just really want to see them take up another survival horror title. I just have one requirement. Bring back the Mushroom Boy.